Kelly, it's good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
All right, all right. So for folks that don't know Kelly, Kelly is she hosts a podcast called Let's Talk Skills, Baby. Me and Kelly met a few years back, and we just connected because we recognize that the things that universities and colleges are really allowing students to grow is their skills, right? And when we talk about skills, we always just focus a little bit on the tactical. How does someone, write a code, or how does someone write a paper, or how does, and yet there's so many different type of skills that every course actually enables, right? So Kelly is part of MC. She is what they call a global skills evangelist. Anytime you see the word evangelist, that's a fun job, right? Because you get to bring your passion. Kelly brings that every day. Prior to MC, she consulted Columbia University School of Professional Studies and CUNY. So she comes in with a higher ed perspective, and I'm really excited for you, Kelly, to just talk about skills. How does it relate to higher ed? And I'm really, really passionate about future of work, right? And future of work is what universities and colleges have to start thinking about. If they continue to pave the same path, they're going to be schools that think about future work and how does skills get aligned for the curriculum and things like that. So I welcome this discussion, and I'm really grateful that you're joining us today. On another note, Kelly's not feeling well, and I know that. So I'm even more grateful for you being able to come in and talk today.
Thank you so much. And again, I am just so thrilled to be here because, the thing is that my passion around this actually started when I was in college myself. I went to the College of Charleston in South Carolina, go Cougars, woohoo. And when I went to school, the thing was that although a traditional student, was actually not at all like my peers at all. So I came out of high school to go directly into college. But I had to pay for my education. So I would typically work 4 or 5 part-time jobs while I was going to school. So for me, the decisions that I made in my education time and when I wanted to end up changing my major, it was extremely important for me to consider what I call, I didn't know the words back then, but it was like the return on investment for my education because it was coming directly out of my pocket. And let me tell you, based on that conversation we just heard, which was like a great starting point to this, I was up to my eyeballs in debt, unfortunately, trying to get through just the bachelor's degree. And what it really made me understand at that time was that, and again, this didn't initially present itself to me as a passion, right? But there were just a few things that happened that like over time, I realized looking back in retrospect, when I was working in school, and when I finally did graduate, I ended up graduating a little early because again, it was like financially, I only had enough to go 3 years and that was it. So I had to get it done in 3 years while working. And when I ended up graduating, I went in going for a biology degree. My father was a dentist. He had, groomed me into taking over his dental practice, and that was going to be the way. And what I realized was that was not my passion, unfortunately. And so I made a change, and it was so hard to make a change. At the time, I was looking through, it was all paper back then. It's been a while now since I graduated. So everything was like me looking through the course book, me making phone calls, me trying to figure out what jobs it meant if I did this or if I did that. And what I landed with was a degree in business because I thought, hey, that'll kind of get me a few things, right? Well, someone actually in particular in one of my, I say like adults in my life, because I was working all these jobs. So I was working with adults. They probably weren't that old in the whole scheme of things. They were probably mid-20s. But this one person, I remember it to this day. When I graduated, I received my job offer. My first job offer for a full-time job was making $28,000. Now, I mean, I was making like double that in my 4 or 5 part-time jobs. So I was just really like, how am I going to pay for rent? How am I going to live life? All of the specifics over how much money you make. And in that same moment, within those few months that I was going through that process, one of my adult coworkers, her husband, who did not have a college degree, but mind you, received a job offer from Nucor Steel, which was essentially a clean manufacturing, facility about 30 minutes north of Charleston, South Carolina. And he received a job offer for $80,000 with on the job 6-week certificate. And quite honestly, I'm still friends with her today. Within 2 years, he was making over $100,000. Now, it took me a while to get there, but granted, now I look back and I'm like, return on investment score, like it was worth it. But I felt like there were enough people out there where, was this always the best way for them to go through? So this is why, in all honesty, I wanted to dig into this. So when I first got into the world of skills, if you will, I was working for a subsidiary of Randstad. And this subsidiary of Randstad, which was located in New York City, basically what I was doing day in and day out was meeting with or placing high IT consultants for 3 major financial institutions. And although I was based in New York City, these were globally. So it was BNP Paribas, Citigroup, and Bank of America. And I would meet with hiring managers every day. And those hiring managers would be telling me what they were interested in for this potential consultant. And what would end up happening was they most often did not know. So yeah, if you guys had this idea that employers are, know exactly what they want, they don't. And they would basically end up coming up with this huge laundry list. Again, it was pen and paper still back then. I would be writing, taking notes, and they'd be listing out all these technical skills. And at the end, the manager would also say, and also a master's in such and such. There was some level of degree that was always slapped on top of this. What I learned really, really quickly, because I wanted to be successful in my job, was that, yeah, there were some technical skills that were pretty important. I mean, these were IT roles, of course, but most often they were relying on whatever degree they put on that list to fill the most important skills, which were what we now call human skills. Back then, we probably called soft skills. And surprisingly enough, these same soft skills, actually the ones that you see listed here on this page, communications, that was always verbal and written, leadership, teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking, these basic skills were the skills that they were typically talking about. And this graph, being that it's actually a recent graph, comes from one of MZ's recent reports called Resilient Skills, which is available on the website. But what this graph is actually saying is that still to this day, this is 15 years later, these are the most important skills sought after by employers for a huge variety of roles. And the reason that I point this out is because, this is actually this process is still surprisingly enough at employers, like this manual process that I went through these many years ago, is actually advanced, but maybe not as much as you think. A lot of times, employers, and I'm sure everyone has heard it up to this point, employers kind of get frustrated about like, hey, I thought that I was getting someone who knew all this stuff when I hired this person with this degree. But they're sort of making this complaint, this like general complaint across the entire ecosystem that like, that's not actually what I'm getting. And how do I figure out how to get the person with those right mix of skills? So although I started in working, from an employer perspective, again, I had this background experience of my school where I was like, there's something here, right? Because the hiring process itself is a little broken, maybe, right? My experience in school, I'm still kind of confused at how this was still early in my career. Like, how was that going to be something where I could find what it is that makes me super passionate? And I couldn't figure that out. And what I ended up doing was that I ended up working with a startup. I was, working. So I mentioned earlier in the deck here that this is the third, MZ is the third labor market analytics firm that I've worked for. So just so you guys know, when I come at this, when I'm talking about skills, this is something that I have a huge breadth of information in. So although I started at Randstad, when I moved into startup world, we ended up purchasing a failing .com startup that was the first patenter of job scraping technology. What does that mean? Think of Indeed, but before Indeed was around, we were actually pulling job postings. And when the 2008 financial crisis hit, one of our clients at the time was the state of New Jersey's Department of Labor. And there was this whole situation happening, which actually looks sort of like the mini COVID crisis of today, where there were all of these people on unemployment. And there was this mismatch happening between how do we put them into open roles? Because again, the data back then didn't really look at skills. And we ended up creating this entire way to look at analytics around this type of data. We sold it to Burning Glass Technologies. I was part of that acquisition. I helped build their business. And I've now, joined MZ along with our head of analytics here at MZ, who was the client back from the New Jersey Department of Labor, surprisingly enough, the one who actually thought through these ideas. And we've come to continue this good work. And so, when we talk about skills as sort of the foundation, the reason that I keep focusing so much on skills is because when you think of the ecosystem of hiring and learning, for so many years, we focused on, this degree, this zip code, sort of this high level, understanding of what a person had in terms of education. And then on the flip side, we were talking about jobs in occupations or like standard ONET or, SOC, whatever it is that you're familiar with. And the two did not speak the same language. And skills, I always saw for all these years as being this sort of translation layer to help us better understand what employers are looking for, better understand what people bring to the table, and how we can actually make that connection so that they are mobile in their life. So, why is this at all important? I know everyone's like, we are hearing skills all the time. Believe me, I'm hearing skills all the time too, but that's why I love it. So I wanted to really quickly lean on something here. There's sort of like two changes that are happening in the market. And I work on a ton of initiatives. I've worked with hundreds of schools beyond the ones that I've consulted with through my work at Burning Glass and through my work at MZ. I've been working with schools since about 2007. So over time, this is a really long time, but I've also been, my focus on working with schools was really how can, I take what I know from employers and help schools better understand how to use that information to provide better for the people they serve, for their learners, for their students, and also to be more successful. Because quite honestly, I think things are just changing so quickly, it's hard to keep up. So of course, I don't think it's new to anyone that the job market is changing quickly. We have heard about automation, AI, for a while. COVID, I put that up here on the list because in all honesty, COVID has just accelerated what was already happening. So I was working with a group of 12 insurance companies. This was pre-COVID, actually, earlier this year, prior to COVID happening. These 12 insurance companies had banded together because they had determined that their claims processing jobs, they were working on technology that was going to automate those jobs. Now, guess what? These 12 insurance companies had 140,000 people in those jobs, and they knew in 3 years that those jobs would be gone. And what were they going to do to handle that? And they were talking about things like, what skills do we need to help our people with, upskilling, these popular terms right now, upskilling, reskilling. How do these people actually already have skills that are transferable into other jobs? Can we help absorb them within our insurance companies, or do we have to find them new work? So like I said, these conversations were happening pre-COVID, and in my world, they've been happening for a long time. I started working with schools to understand these changes, like I said, many, many years ago. But it has really started rapidly changing this year in particular. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, because what I'd love to do is really open this up for discussion, but sometimes it's great to be able to bring what I get to work on day in and day out in terms of like what else is happening in the world that is making these fluctuations and how we can keep up with that. And maybe some suggestions for you at your institution to look at this in a way to be more successful. Because I don't want this to seem doom and gloom by any means. These are real, true opportunities to grow your institution into the future. So as the job market is changing, what's happening with people? What's happening with our learners? they're needing to adjust too, right? Because on average, a person has 10 different jobs in their career. That number is actually pre-COVID, unfortunately. So and probably a few years old. And so the thing is that people are also living longer. So I have a feeling that that number of average jobs over a lifetime is actually going to increase. But these people, to be successful in their life, because they know that they always want to keep growing and moving, and usually it's financially and job related because they want to take care of their families, have a good viable job, right? Um, these people are needing to adjust and move more quickly. And, when we talk about options available to them, because they want to move more quickly, they tend to look at alternative learning opportunities that can be much more short-term opportunities that can help them navigate the world of work faster. I also am showing a little snapshot here of some work that I'm doing. There's a huge number of initiatives that are actually helping facilitate this learner worker movement, one being the learner employment record movement. I don't know if anyone has heard of that before, but this is just a quick little view into what this looks like. I know interoperable learning records was sort of the initial language to describe this particular movement, but the idea being that right now people have a resume, people have a social media profile. We can write on there what our former education has been. Maybe not everyone is, super honest about that information, but this particular movement is to create a digitized version of our former education and our former work history that is authenticated so that employers can actually trust what it is that they're bringing to the table. But here's the kicker on these learner employment records. Think about what I said earlier in terms of employers thinking that when they get someone with a certain degree that they're going to have a certain set of skills. Well, guess what? Now employers really want to be able to see that. They want to be able to see that the person that they might be interested in bringing on to work with them actually has those set of skills, because this concept of this like a gig economy is really, really strong. Most of the employers that I talk with, and there's a lot, don't even know what jobs they will have open in the next 5 years. That means they don't know what technologies are around, what skills they're going to need. And so employers are really thinking of like, how can I actually train people on the job as opposed to moving them in and out of education so that I can keep them moving faster. And this particular movement is helping them really keep track of this information and also helping and empowering the actual learner and worker in their life to be able to navigate. And so as these things start happening, we're seeing this huge shift and change. And what I want to talk about is just some areas that schools can work on to really adjust to essentially what it is. I know we don't talk about this very often, that universities and learning and education is actually a business, but essentially it is. It's the same, right? Anytime that a business has the needs of the group that they're serving, in your case, your students, and employers that are hiring your students, when their needs start changing, the business itself has to adjust and change. And that's what I want to talk about here, is that it really is, don't think of this as a bad thing. This is really an opportunity to grow. And some of the areas that, groups that I'm working on, initiatives that I'm working on, are things that are helping schools understand the skills they're teaching. Because when the school understands the skills they're teaching, they're able to communicate that to their students, who are then able to communicate that to employers. It increases the return on investment for those students moving in and out. I also talk a little bit here about sort of these hybrid options. Again, remembering that these learners need to be able to move quickly. They might be looking at a promotion and they know that they need just a few sort of add-ons in their skills to move in that direction. Wouldn't it be great if they could still come back to the school that they have engaged with to be able to upskill, as we call it, right? Upskill or reskill throughout their lifetime. It's not only a one-time thing, right? We're not just sitting down for the 4 to 6 years to begin with. How can we extend that? Creating public and private partnerships. I say that because like partnerships with employers, creating those work and learn options. Not all employers know what learning to provide, and working with universities to understand that and also help them, internally progress their employees is going to be really, really important. I want to pause here because I know we're getting, like I talked maybe a little bit longer than I had planned, but maybe just to open this up for discussion, Matt, because there are so many various initiatives, which I'm happy to jump in with, but maybe some questions on, what schools or what people are experiencing and challenges and where I could direct them or answer.
No, it's been great. I love this visual, to be honest with you, because I think this visual of where does curriculum play in terms of the skills is something that I don't think higher ed has ever, at least the academics haven't really thought of it that way. Now, I think the more innovative schools have started to go this route, right? The discussions we're having with schools are with people that are saying we have to start serving the industry because that industry is going to give up jobs. Hence, the ROI for that student that goes to my institution is the opportunity to join a company, right? There's this, what I call the educational value chain, right? And I believe that we're still going to have traditional. There's going to be a set of students who get on the cruise ship and they cruise around the 4-year, journey, and they have their little parties on Fridays and football games on Saturdays and campus life. That's still going to happen. But there is going to be a set of people that need a quick flight to learn something. They also need specialization. There's so much specialization. Yesterday in my Future of Learning, I talk about the 5 value drivers. One, people pick schools because of brand and reputation, because they get some jobs. There is experience, that 4-year journey. They want that collegiate life. They have this specialization, which a lot of people, when they come into college, they're like, what do I become, right? So that specialization is really important, and I'll come back to that in a second. And then, of course, convenience and affordability are the 5. To go back on specialization, this is where skills comes into play. You can certainly design, like Google can offer up Google courses, or Tesla could offer up Tesla courses, right? Those are really important pieces. But if they only learn that segment of information, I think we lose a little bit of what college is really giving to someone. Yeah. I am a criminal justice major, but I learned a lot of things through my college experience, right? Dealing with people, dealing with deadlines, dealing with experience. So I think the question that I'm going to kind of pose to you is, how do you balance both the traditional as well as the non-traditional? And where does skills play in a traditional world? And where does it play in what we would call the non-traditional, which I think is soon become much more traditional?
Right. I agree. I think if we actually look at the numbers, the non-traditional is starting to outpace the traditional, which is probably why, many of us this year are seeing decreasing enrollments because of many reasons, right, due to COVID. But prior to that, that was already happening. And quite frankly, Matt, I think skills plays a place in both areas, because even if the student is a student that has the time and space and financial capacity to come and sit down and have that experience, that is fantastic. They still need a job. In most cases, we're not all lucky enough to not be in that case. The majority of the reason that they're coming is for career. That concept of skills, again, because of this decreased enrollment, we want to be able to engage with them throughout that lifespan, right? So yes, they may come to us this one time, but as they start navigating those changes in career, we want to make sure that they're coming back. And skills is sort of this way to help them understand what the return is on continuing to engage. Now, of course, that, if you think about that aspect, that really has to do with that non-traditional student. They may not come down and sit with you for 4 or 6 years. They may be moving in and out the entire time. So skills is still helping them understand what you're giving them to keep that progression happening and why they want to keep coming back to you. And I also think this concept of skills, when we talk typically in curriculum, we don't sit down and write syllabus that is like, here are the skills that I think someone would need in this job. We don't typically write it that way. But essentially, we have to think about, okay, let me write my typical syllabus document, but then think about, in the world of work, what do these things really mean? How can I translate that? And there are, a number of translation layers to make that happen, and in an automated process. So I wouldn't expect every faculty member to sit there and know what every job is, because not even every company knows what every job is. But there are ways to use data and analytics to actually understand that information and bring that back in. For years now, schools have been using labor market data to create better programs. This is sort of taking it to the next level. Like, I'm already creating better programs. Let me just better communicate what I've created in these better programs so that we can share that return on investment across the board and help us grow as well.
Yeah. So, because I'm really passionate about future work, so are you. And the reason that Beyond is built is around future work and future of learning, like rethinking what the world will look like moving forward. The great thing about future work, it never gets outdated, right? We will have new jobs with new skills, with new innovative practices that need to be taught and retaught throughout the process. It's an agile, continuous learning model, and we're going to talk about continuous learning at some point in time. But the thing that I think is really important, and this is an important thing for campuses to understand, is that right now, everyone focuses on the 4-year degree, the 4-year path. And what other industry do you have a customer or a consumer, and then after they've done, consuming you really kind of forget about them? The reality of it is, if you can allow for continuous learning and using skills, or the word skills is maybe not always the best thing for folks. They don't.
Sometimes competencies.
Yeah, competencies might be a better word, but whatever the word we use, the reality of it is, universities disseminate knowledge and allow for students and learners to grow. How do we do that as a continuous learning model with the lens of wearing future of work, right? And I'm pitching future work all the time to schools to say, do you understand what your industries are serving? Do you understand what your campus needs to look like? How do you see that? How does future work and the constant evolution where skills are going to be, how does a campus do that? And then how does a learner find those institutions that do that?
Yeah, I think this is such an important point. I was even thinking of teachers, in this particular year, think of all of the new skills that teachers have had to learn in an extreme short period of time just to handle virtual learning, right?
Yeah.
Just to handle the adjustments that we've had. I mean, basically that is sort of this visual in our minds. All of us have experienced this in some way of how this works, right? So this is basically it. Things change and adjust, and all of a sudden you need to change and adjust. And in some cases, did these teachers sit down and take a course to learn those things? Probably not. They just had to do it right away and figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, that was like a little aside, but I just found that really interesting as you were describing that. And really, truly, this is a great representation of future of work. That's exactly what happens, is all of a sudden there is a moment that requires change. In this case, it was a global crisis that we all felt. And we can now understand and see sometimes they're micro things that happen just at that organization or just in a particular region, or whatever it may be, that require these changes towards what we call future of work. But in the future of work, in all honesty, it's like people have more control over their mobility. It changes the dynamic of how they're going to choose and move in and out of work and learning, meaning the actual empowerment of people with their data is changing how employers, think of like talent pipelines and think of like potential jobs. And remember, COVID has accelerated this remote learning opportunity. People were moving out of urban centers as well. So instead of me saying as an employer, I'm just hiring in this particular region, the world is my oyster. Yeah. I can go anywhere and pick anyone that I want to. And it's kind of the same way when it comes to learning for all of our people. They realize there's this whole new world out there in the way that it's going to look in the future. And now I can pick and choose wherever I want to be.